All right, welcome back. We're going to take a study up today in Ezekiel chapter 4. And we'll jump right in at verse 1. The first three chapters you can follow, it's rather cryptic writing. Some of it sounds a lot like Revelation. There's some pieces in there where he sees the faces of the different creatures and whatnot. But we're going to take a look at this prophecy. And in 4:1 it says, "Thou also, Son of man, take thee a tile and lay it before thee, and portray upon it the city, even Jerusalem," or Aleph Tav, Jerusalem. That's where I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the A and the Z, the Aleph and the Tav. There's a Aleph Tav there that's untranslated. I'll throw those in where they're at because they have meaning, and they haven't been translated in any versions I've seen. You can pick up eSword and see these, if you have the Hebrew with it. If you know the King James plus the Hebrew with it. Continuing on, Ezekiel chapter 4 verse 2. "And lay siege against it, and build against a fort against it, and cast up a mount against it, camp against it, set battering rams against it round about. Moreover, take you an iron pan, and set it for a wall of iron between thee and the city, and set Aleph Tav face against it, and it shall be besieged, and you shall lay siege against it, and this shall be a sign to the house of Israel." Now, it's funny that this is written to the house of Israel, because Ezekiel's writing more than 120 years after the northern kingdom, the house of Israel, was already conquered. So if he's writing a prophecy about the house of Israel being conquered, he's 120 years late. A little over that. 120 years late. It would be like somebody today writing a prophecy about, the Japanese are going to attack us at Pearl Harbor. Well, it doesn't make much sense. In fact, if you go back to Ezekiel 1:1, it says, "Now it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th year, in the 5th day of the month, I was among the captives of the river Chebar." So this is Ezekiel in Babylon, the Babylonian captivity, which the southern kingdom, the house of Judah, got conquered 120 years later, and they all went into the Babylonian captivity to Babylon. And that's where Ezekiel was. So as you read this, you have to put this in your mind, because he's writing this to the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Remember, the 10 northern tribes are the house of Israel, and the 2 southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, are the house of Judah. And he's writing this to both, and they both sound like they get conquered in this prophecy as we go on. So Ezekiel's writing this 120 years later. It wouldn't make any sense that he's writing this to the old house of Israel. This is a future end-time house of Israel that he's writing this to. The 10 northern tribes at this end time. And in verse 3 it says that too. He was in the land of the Chaldeans, 1:3 of Ezekiel. In the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar, in the hand of Kabar, in the hand of Yahuwah. The hand of Yahuwah was there upon him, upon Ezekiel. So as we write this has great importance to this end time, because it's the end time house of Israel and end time house of Judah that he's writing to. Not past tense. He wasn't just giving you a history lesson and then giving you some prophecy. It wouldn't make any sense otherwise. Just wouldn't make any sense at all. You don't, he could just be giving you a history lesson. But no, he's telling you what's going to be coming to pass. Now going on. In chapter 4, in Ezekiel 4, verse 4, he says, lie upon your left side, and lay the Aleph Tav iniquity of the house of Israel upon it, according to the number of days that you shall lie upon it, you shall bear Aleph Tav their iniquity. For I have laid upon you the years of their iniquity, according to the number of days, 390 days, so shall you bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. And it goes on in verse 6. When you have accomplished Aleph Tav, then lie again on the right side, and you shall bear the Aleph Tav iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I have appointed you each day for a year. So he's giving him a day for a year. So this prophecy is about a time of years, and 390 years of the house of Israel, and 40 years for the house of Judah to bear iniquity. This is all about iniquity in these times, these years. Verse 7, therefore you shall set your face toward the siege toward Jerusalem, and thy arm shall be uncovered, and you shall prophesy against it. Now what does this arm uncovered mean? Why does he say that in here? Well, an arm uncovered is a sign of unrestrained power. I had to look this up. I thought, well, what is that? You ever see the pictures of Rosie the Riveter and she's giving you the muscle? Or you see muscle men and they'll give you the muscle and they're showing you their arm. That means unrestrained power. And on a national level, that's what it means. You're going to come into to be the powerhouse. And so that's what he's talking about. This 390 years plus 40 years for the house of Judah. Well, add those two together and what do you get? 390 plus 40 equals 430 years. So we have a time period of 430 years that Ezekiel is plainly talking about, and he lays on his side for 430 days. 390 for the house of Israel, 40 for the house of Judah. And he says, I'm giving you a day for a year of their iniquity. They're going to have terrible iniquity at this end time, and he's laying a day for a year on it. Because that's what just said up there in verse 6. I have appointed you a day for a year. So we're talking about a 430-year period, and it's written to both houses and Jerusalem. And conquering comes to all of them all at once. We'll cover that more coming up in chapter 5. But so let's take a look now at the rest of this. So as before we go on, when did this end time house of Israel? Now, if you're familiar with the house of Israel, being Manasseh and Ephraim and the 10 northern tribes scattered, the Anglo-Saxon tribes and whatnot, when did they come in? If you're familiar with the fact that England is Manasseh and Ephraim, we spun off from that. Ephraim's the United States, Manasseh being England, and these being the children of Israel. Queen Elizabeth tracing her lineage man to man back to King David. All the royalty over there is of the house of Judah. They're Jews. They don't call themselves Jews. They're not religious Jews, but they're of the house of Judah. They're of the lineage. And so as we weigh these out and say, well, when did the tribes come back into power? Because we were conquered 120 years before Ezekiel by the Assyrians, and then we went into the Assyrian captivity for about 2 years. And then Assyria was conquered, and we scattered up into the Caucasus Mountains, where we get Caucasian, and then fled up into northwestern Europe, and then across to the British Isles and whatnot. Some of them fled out there ahead of time by ship and whatnot. That's where Jeremiah went, was all the way out to Ireland. I've covered that in another one, where he took Tippy, one of the princesses of Zedekiah, and she intermarried with Haramon of the Zerah line, of the kingly line. That's for another story. But so when did England come into power, as we have today, and then the United States as we followed on, brother nations here? Well, as you look back in time and think, well, was there a decisive time when they gained power, and who was before them? Before them were the Spanish, and the Spanish ruled the high seas for long periods of time, and they settled many islands. The Spaniards conquered all the South Pacific and Central America and the Caribbean. And why do we have all the Spanish conquering? Well, because they were the powerhouse. They had the unrestrained power for a long time. Until what? Well, when in 1588, Sir Francis Drake defeated the Spanish Armada. First, he sailed the year before into Cadiz, Spain, and softened them up. So they had to wait another year before they sailed the Armada, this 130 ships. On July 29th, he set the Armada of 130 ships and 20,000 soldiers ablaze with providential winds and fire ships. They came up to conquer Great Britain with 20,000 soldiers on 130 ships. And boy, they got a whooping. I mean, boy, they got a whooping. They could never. And they called it providential winds. These winds changed and shifted as they came up there, and they started firing upon them. And the winds pushed them over to France. They ended up sailing up to France. They had unfavorable winds, and the winds were blowing in the favor of the British. And that was a startling change for them. And they sent fire ships down there and burned them all up. and a lot of them burnt. And then the British chased them to Scotland. They had to flee out of there. The remainder of the Armada sailed around Scotland and Ireland, and many ships floundered and were driven onto the coast of Ireland. And the last of the surviving fleet made it back to Spain in October of 1588. 15,000 men perished, and not much of their fleet made it back. And then notes from, I took this off of some history stuff you can find online. Queen Elizabeth I, her decisive defeat of the Invincible Armada, they called it, made England a world-class power and introduced effective long-range weapons into naval warfare for the first time. And it goes on. So this is when the English began to rule the high seas. Yeah, they decisively defeated the Spanish. And since that time, the sun has never set on the British Empire, on England. That's why they conquered all these places around the world. They could stand offshore with their ships, and like over there off of Malaysia, they got a little island with a big fort and all that. And they could trounce people and shell them to pieces from long-range ships offshore, and lob in and defeat whole armies. And they took over all the world. India. The British, were everywhere. Over Australia, New Zealand. There were these, from 1588 on, boy, they conquered a lot of the world. That little island off of northwest Europe, managed to conquer the whole world. And everybody used their money, the British pound sterling and everything else, until little brother that became stronger and bigger, took over America, and we've done the same since. So, I can't think of any other time in history when we have gained a 430-year period of unrestrained power. I could be wrong, but if you can think of anything else, write to me and let me know. But this is it. This looks like it to me. And the timing is perfect to this year. Because if you take 1588, when England gains unrestrained power on the high seas and worldwide, and you add 430 years, what does that take us to? 2018. In fact, it takes us to October of 2018, because that's when the last little bit of that surviving, in October, they were being dashed to pieces against the Irish coastline, and their sailors were dying at sea because they were out of supplies, it says, if you study it up. 15,000 men perished. And the last little stragglers made it back in October of 1588. And that's when the unrestrained power of England began, October of 1588, which takes us to, 430 years later, October of 2018, if we're counting from 1588. And it goes on in Ezekiel 4:8. And behold, I will lay bands upon you, and you shall not turn from one side to the other till you have ended the days of thy siege. Well, these bands upon him are a sign of what? Slavery or servitude. And Israel, ancient Israel, was exactly 430 years in the Egyptian slavery. If you go back to Exodus 12:40, it says, Now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. The exact same time. Exact same time frame. And it came to pass at the end of 430 years, this is Exodus 12:41, even the self-same day it came to pass that all the hosts of Yahuwah went out from the land of Egypt. So, most people don't realize that they're in slavery now. England and USA have not served Yahuwah and kept his laws. They've enslaved their own people. Albeit most people don't know they are enslaved, just like in Egypt. Remember, most of the Israelites back then wanted to go back to Egypt. It was better, even if we're enslaved, we ate good. Well, that's the way it is here in the States now. People don't know they're in slavery because they've been indoctrinated not to keep these laws. And these nations, England and USA, have not kept Yahuwah's laws. They've added to his laws. We'll cover that next time. Till then, hallelujah. Hallelujah. All right, welcome back. We're going to take a study up today in Ezekiel chapter 4. And we'll jump right in at verse 1. The first three chapters you can follow. There's